I'm Ben Mead. I'm the founder of the Mead Foundation. It's my family foundation that we started in the Philippines in 2015. Moved there with my kids and saw an opportunity to help in a number of areas. You know, the Philippines is a really wonderful place, but there's a lot of need in a lot of areas, and so felt that we had the ability to start a number of initiatives that could sustain themselves and also scale and impact a lot of people. You know, I've had a very fortunate life, and so it sort of feels to me like it's the right thing to do what I can to help and to give back both the community but also the local environment. We started out initially focused on medical missions. We still do that today. That's one of the programs that the Mead Foundation has. I was approached in 2016 by an American who wanted to do coral reef restoration in the Philippines. He'd been down there on a diving trip and he'd seen a lot of destruction of the reef. 95% of the reefs in the Philippines are negatively impacted. There has been a lot of dynamite fishing and things like that, which is these days is not such a problem. There's ongoing pressure though. There's a lot of siltation because a lot of land's been deforested. And there's a lot of extractive activities, a lot of overfishing. More than 80 million Filipinos rely on seafood as their primary protein, and so you've got this unique environment where the Philippines is sort of the global centre for marine biodiversity. Yet the reefs are under so much pressure because they've been taken for granted for so long. So I was approached by Brent Anderson, who's the founder of the Living Planet Aquarium in Salt Lake City, which is it's a non-profit, but it's run sort of as a business. It's the fourth largest aquarium in the US, and really fantastic job that they've done there. And Brent's a real visionary, and so I have some business back in the US. I was on a business trip going back to Park City in Utah, and my business partner said, "This guy wants to meet you, Brent Anderson." I said, "Look, I'm sorry. I'm sure he's a great guy, but I'm really busy." Yeah, he said he wants to do coral reef restoration with your foundation, and I said, "Look, I'm sorry, I don't want to waste his time because I'm already so busy. Got the business, got the kids, got all these other programs. We were doing a number of programs with the Mead Foundation." I said, "I'm sorry, cancel the meeting because I don't want to waste his time. Can't do it." My partner insisted 3 or 4 times. I told him, "Look, please just cancel the meeting. I don't want to meet this guy because I don't want to waste his time. I can't do it." He wouldn't stop. So finally I said, "Okay, I'll go meet him." So I went down and sat down with Brent, and he told me what he wanted to do. And after 15 minutes, I was like, "Okay, let's do it." Shook his hand. So basically we started out using one technique for coral reef restoration, which is coral fragmentation. So this is a technique that was pioneered in the Florida Keys through an accidental discovery that basically if you break mature corals, they rapidly regrow. Coral Restoration Foundation in the Florida Keys is sort of the pioneer of this. They've got a large area where they establish these coral nurseries. So you basically put these, we call them coral trees, so they're tethered on the sea floor. They have a float, they have branches. It looks like an old antenna or almost like a Christmas tree or something like that. And then you find these broken corals, maybe the size of your finger. These are broken off from either boating or divers or storms or whatever it is. I mean, the reef will break. It's sort of it happens in nature, but it also happens through human activity. So you take these, you put these back on the nursery using a bit of fishing line, and basically within 6 months, a piece like your finger will grow like your hand, and depending on the type of coral, of course. And then you take that and you refragment it, you plant it back on the reef. So that's all very interesting. So we thought we'd give it a try. It hadn't been done in the Philippines before. So Brent and his team from Living Planet, they came down. It would have been 2017, and we actually started in Cebu. The first project we did was in Mactan at the Shangri-La. We did one at Malapascua Island as well, which is a famous diving site. And basically the model has been to partner with dive shops and dive operators because this technique has proven to be very, very successful. So it's flourishing in the Philippines. We're now in 5 locations. The corals grow really rapidly. We focus on faster growing branching corals, basically to lay the foundation of, so you've got a degraded area, you lay the foundation, and then the reef will sort of naturally rehabilitate itself over time. proven to be very successful, but it requires quite a lot of diver activity. You've got to clean it. We do data. It's been a very sort of scientific approach. So the model's been to partner with dive shops because they'll go out there every week. They'll clean the corals, outplanting, things like this. We're now expanded the project, as I mentioned, from 2 sites in Cebu, which we've handed over to the operator partners now. We continue to operate our largest sites in Bohol, in Panglao. We have in Dumaguete. We have in Iba Zambales. We just launched in Porto Galera. And we have a lot of people who approach us who want to learn, and so we're actually in the planning phases for doing like a capacity building type initiative, so people can come, we'll teach them, we'll give them the tools to start, they can go back and they can do their own project. So we started out with this one technique, and when we expanded to Zambales is where the model started to evolve a little bit. So I have some business in Zambales, so I have a lot more resources there. I spend a lot more time there, and during COVID, I was spending more time on site. Actually, Zambales is not known for coral reefs. Zambales is a province that suffers a lot from the utilization of its natural resources. The mining industry is really big in Zambales. Forestry used to be really big in Zambales. The condition of the reefs is really degraded, and that's why it's really not known for its coral reefs. There are actually some really nice pristine coral reefs, like in Hermana Menor. That Hermana Menor is close to our project site, similar conditions, similar depth. It's a prime example of well-administered marine protected areas, really helping to keep the reef in its natural state. There's not a lot of fish there because it's overfished in the surrounding areas, but the reef cover is really good. And so, as we were spending more time in Zambales, learning more about it, saw an opportunity to bring the restoration project to Zambales. Actually, it came about because we were approached to do a sea turtle conservation project. I didn't know all of this. Zambales is not known for its environmental quality, shall we say, but Zambales is one of the primary sea turtle nesting areas in the Philippines. So all 5 species of sea turtles, or pawikan, which is the local term, nest in Zambales. But there's a lot of poaching pressure, and so people go and collect the eggs, they sell the eggs, they eat the eggs, and so it was during COVID. A bit more time in our hands, and my partners at Sundowners Resort were approached by someone in the local government to do this sea turtle conservation project, which has been very successful, and we're going to our 4th year now. But they mentioned they were attempting to do some coral restoration in some of the marine protected areas. What I then found out was that every municipality, every town in Zambales has a marine protected area. It's been an initiative to create this network of marine protected areas, which is a good start. The problem with it is that they're usually under-resourced. So the funding and the resources are supposed to come from the local government. They have a local government enforcement, sort of like, I would call it an agency. It's basically a community initiative. It's called Bantai Dagat. But the funding for that comes from the mayor's office. So often they may have boats, but they don't have fuel. It's usually volunteered or minimal pay. And so you've got these marine protected areas, but essentially they exist on paper, but there's sort of fairly limited active management. And so this is where the thinking started to evolve a little bit. So what we've done in Zambales is we've taken the coral fragmentation technique, but we've evolved it into a more holistic and integrated approach. So we've actually have an agreement with the mayor, the local government, to take over the management of the marine protected area in Iba Zambales. So that's a 50-hectare marine MPA. And so we started with a coral fragmentation nursery in Iba. And then I was approached I was actually approached by the US Embassy and the Australian Embassy at the same time. They'd heard what we were doing, and they were interested to learn more. The Aussies, I guess, I'm Aussie, so the Aussies ended up taking the lead, and they said, look, we really like what you're doing. Marine conservation is an increasing priority for the Australian government, particularly in the West Philippine Sea. There's challenges for the fishermen in that area because of disputes going on and various pressures, and so they said, look, we like what you're doing. We think that we can probably help you. We want to introduce you to Peter Harrison, and so that's where I met Peter. We connected through the Australian Embassy with Southern Cross University and Peter Harrison, and also with the University of the Philippines Marine Science Institute. They have a foundation that does their non-profit initiatives, and so basically met with Peter. I mean, fantastic guy, brilliant guy. Learned about what he'd done as far as pioneering the larval restoration or the coral spawning technique. Actually, Peter had already been doing this a little further north in the Philippines, and so there'd been success at a site in Bolinao, working with UP, and we proposed to the Australian government that what we would do is we would have this model where we continue to manage the marine protected area. We do the larval restoration in there as well as the coral fragmentation technique, and so this is the first time where the two techniques have been married, which is it's important because there's not one technique for coral reef restoration. Different techniques are more suited to different conditions. So fragmentation is fantastic for rapid reef regeneration, or if you have an acute event that causes destruction. Down in Bohol, there was a typhoon that went through in 2021, massive damage to the reef, and so we've been able to sort of accelerate the recovery, well, at least we believe we've been able to accelerate the recovery of the reef. And so the spawning technique allows you to achieve larger scale restoration with less diver hours required, because you're really sort of assisting nature to repopulate the reef with what we hope is genetically stronger coral donor sites, because they've been resilient to bleaching and unfavorable conditions. So knowing that the nearby marine protected area, Hamana Manor, had this pristine coral cover, we believe that the marine protected area that we were now administering could achieve the same results. And so we proposed a program to the Australian government where we received funding to allow us to scale up the project, allow us to demarcation of the marine protected area, the resources to really do it right, and the idea being that this could be a model that people could go and replicate elsewhere. We're now 2 years into the project. We're quite hopeful that we're about 6 months from the end of the initial funding from the Australian government. We're quite hopeful that there'll be extension, because I think the project's been very successful, and from what we've seen, it seems to be very well received. We're also planning to bring in other aspects to the program. One of the things that's really important in the Philippines for conservation is that you've got to not just address the outcomes of the negative environmental practices. So the coral reefs are degraded because of too much activity, overfishing, siltation, and ultimately all of that goes back to poverty and people who are struggling for their livelihood. And so you've got to address the environmental issues, but you've got to also address the livelihood issue. Now, on environmental conservation in the Philippines, often the default is to go to ecotourism, which can be very good, but the problem with ecotourism, in my opinion, and that's not to say that there aren't some fantastic examples of ecotourism that has really, come together very well with conservation. But the problem is, if you really want to scale, if you really want to take this as a model that you can go out and replicate elsewhere, you can't do that with ecotourism alone, because ecotourism, just because you want to make something an ecotourism site doesn't mean it's going to be successful. It's so site specific, it's quite expensive, and also the manpower involved. And so it can be a bit of an uphill struggle to develop ecotourism at a site, just because I think ecotourism is the answer for creating livelihoods. So we're planning to pilot seaweed farming, and we're in the planning phases right now. But I believe that it can be a really good solution that's scalable. Philippines is one of the primary seaweed producers in the world, but production is declining because you've got a very fragmented industry. The demand's there, but the supply is declining. And what I'm looking at is if we create seaweed farms in the buffer zone that can lead to these livelihood opportunities, also more activity in the surrounding area that will sort of give the community a sense of ownership. It will help us to protect the marine protected area. The concept is that properly administered and with the coral restoration, it'll become a true fish sanctuary. So you will actually get increasing fish populations, which has spillover effects in the surrounding areas. So if we can partner seaweed farming in the buffer zone as a long-term livelihood, Zambales is not perfect for seaweed farming, but it doesn't need to be perfect, because it's rare that it is perfect. And so what we want to show is, okay, Zambales is 3 months of the year where you won't be able to farm seaweed because of the weather, but the other 9 months of the year you can. And so I believe it will be very successful. And then I think we can take that and expand it elsewhere in the Philippines. There's thousands of marine protected areas in the Philippines, but most of them are not being properly resourced, not being properly administered. And so if we can come with a model where, okay, we fund the community to establish the seaweed farm, we give them a connection to the market, and then we use those proceeds to go back into administering the marine protected area, to me that seems like a scalable proposition. And so that's where I'm hoping we take it from here. It's yet to be done, so it's yet to be proven that, I'm sure it won't be a straight road. I'm sure that there'll be challenges to have, but regardless of that, it's been a very successful initiative, what we're doing with Peter Harrison, Southern Cross, and University of the Philippines. And so I'm very satisfied and very honoured to be a part of that. I'm not a scientist. I was going to say I'm not a conservationist. I guess that I am a conservationist now, but I wasn't. I went to the Philippines for business and just saw an opportunity to help out. And so I like to bring people together and do these initiatives that can really be impactful and scalable. And so I think, there's a lot of uncertainty as far as climate change, and the coral reefs are so critical for the planet, and we don't know if what we're doing is going to tilt the dial on that. But what choice do you have? You can't sit back and do nothing.